There will be no TV covering this conference tonight or tomorrow.
Not even 24 hours after the Honorable Reverend Jesse Jackson passed, the same system that whitewashed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and that incessantly sucked the blood from his body, attempting to break him down mentally, psychologically, emotionally, physically, and spiritually while he was still alive, has been at work whitewashing Jackson's legacy in various ways. It doesn't matter whether it's the Western corporate media, the state, the political economic system, the courts, senior political and economic officials, the education system, whatever. They are all whitewashing Jesse Jackson and his legacy. They mention that he was the first black man to run for the presidency of the U.S. both in 1984 and then again in 1988. They'll also say that he failed to win the Democratic presidential nomination.
In the 80s, he twice ran for president, but failed to win the Democratic Party nomination.
What they won't talk about is how terrible and biased the Western press was in treating him as a potential presidential candidate, consistently writing him off as unelectable and radical due to his pro-working class policy positions in adopting Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition and due to his race. What they won't talk about is how the U.S. Supreme Court and the Republicans under the Trump regime and others have attempted to undo Jackson's registering millions of Americans, including the disenfranchised. What they won't tell you is that even within the Democratic Party, Jackson had haters. Here is a 1989 clip of, quote, "I work harder for Israel than I do for the American people," Chuck Schumer, who is in the same political party as Jackson, boasting about blocking Jackson's 1988 presidential platform calling for Palestinian self-determination.
Let me remind you the last time I was booed publicly, and this was the last time, was something you all abhorred, because I was the leader in the fight against the pro-Palestinian Jackson plank at the Democratic Convention.
And that wasn't the only demon within the Democratic Party that Jackson had to fight off. The Democratic Party neglected the voices of various demographics, including black, brown, women, and even working class voters, especially in leadership positions within the party. They won't talk about how they downplayed Jackson's influence during his presidential runs and lifted moderate and centrist landslide losers like Walter Mondale and Michael Dukakis to counter Jackson's populist appeal. What they won't tell you is how even as early as the first presidential run in 1984, Jackson expressed his concerns to the Democratic Party's rules panel over the unfairness of the election process, specifically that winner-takes-all delegates versus proportional allocation favored candidates who were well-connected, rich white men, and that the party's chairman, Paul G. Kirk Jr., shrugged off Jackson's concerns at the time. This rat-fucking burdened the country with 4 more years of Reaganomics and 4 additional years of CIA Bush and his war crimes around the world. And by the way, Jackson was unsurprisingly right. This winner-takes-all delegates rule changed after his 1988 run to allow unknown candidates like Barack Obama to pull ahead of then-establishment candidates like Hillary Clinton. They might talk about how Jackson traveled around the world to highlight the liberation movements against various parasitic colonial and or imperial states. What they won't talk about is how Western states and their corrupt Western regimes held enmity for Jackson for seeing the colonized people's humanity and recognizing them as human beings at a time when the victimizers, most of them Western states and their barbaric systems, dehumanized them. Take South Africa and historic Palestine, for example. These same Western states and their corrupt regimes that propped up and warmly embraced both South Africa and Israel hated that Jackson was shining a light into how evil and oppressive both systems were and still are.
And as South Africa emerged from apartheid, the man who spent years maintaining American pressure against the system was there to watch.
What they won't talk about is how despotic Western rule classified Nelson Mandela, the African National Congress, ANC, Yasser Arafat, and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, as terrorists and terrorist organizations in the late 1980s. How dare black people in South Africa, brown people in Palestine, people in Cuba, etc., fight for their freedom in their ancestral lands from the claws and fangs of the insatiable capitalist white Western Westerners within the Epstein class. Even domestically, Jackson's liberation fight was undermined there too. When it came to his own black American brothers and sisters in the U.S., Jackson was subverted in every way there too by the system. The system whitewashed his fight during the civil rights movement. They remained silent on Jackson's call for restorative justice for foundational black Americans, FBA, and the American Descendants of Slavery, ADOS, in the form of economic reparations. Jesse himself admitted that white people did not want to discuss reparations, that reparations were, quote, undiscussable.
I want to talk a minute about America in denial. What makes this such a difficult discussion tonight is that one thing black people and white people have in common: neither want to discuss reparations for different reasons. White people want to deny it, and black people don't think it's possible.
That's right.
So neither want to discuss it. There is a fear of discussing reparations. Even discussing, I talked with some people today at the conference I was at here in New York. I said, you're going to run Daniels tonight that reparations. Man, what's that all about? I know you're going to wear your dashiki tonight. I don't know what I'm going to wear. It was a way of, in the name of civil rights, putting down the idea of the undiscussable, repair for damage done.
You see almost zero politicians, media outlets, etc. mentioning his fight for reparations for many black Americans. Continuing the economic front, the media will repeatedly play Jackson encouraging Americans to, quote, keep hope alive.
Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. On tomorrow night and beyond.
And to keep dreaming of better days, as if to say, quote, keep hope alive and keep dreaming that the capitalist system that has failed you countless times will allow you to feed yourself and your family. What they won't talk about is how Jackson heavily fought against the corrupt system for black Americans.
When the political system was over, when we ended segregation, black people got freer and American white folks got richer.
And working class Americans as a whole.
Well,
I know the old country boy routine.
we're really putting an awful lot of emphasis into dealing with the effects of this economy upon all poor people, our people in particular. I think our movement now has to have a dual focus: economic generation and spiritual regeneration. Economic generation to the extent that we have more than 6 million people unemployed, 25 million people making less than $3,000 a year, another 25 million less than 6,000, another 25 million less than 9,000. And given the inflated economy, that means that you have 3 levels of real poverty in the country.
Jackson highlighted the widening divide of material resources between the working class and the Epstein class.
Fewer and fewer have more and more have less and less, and the middle class is sinking.
When it came to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, Jackson was viewed as crazy and stigmatized for being utterly skeptical that a single individual without any systemic help could carry out the assassination, and they dismissed and disregarded him as crazy for not trusting a system that had repeatedly surveilled, undermined, and systematically murdered black people, including black leaders, both nationally and locally, for centuries.
Then, in Memphis, Martin Luther King was murdered in front of Jackson. The assassin was later arrested, having fled the country, but Jackson was never convinced he'd been working alone.
This man could not have stalked Dr. King, had a logistical operation, had operative alternative passports, and got out of the country with money alone.
There are multiple calls to action. First, read. The system loves people who don't read because they can't challenge the lies told. Right now, I'm reading a book that came out a few months ago by another political candidate. They want people to be silent, obedient, and indoctrinated. I myself did not know a lot of this information about the Honorable Reverend Jesse Jackson until I literally did hours of research. I did not want them whitewashing Jackson as they did with Dr. MLK Jr. We didn't learn a damn thing about MLK, but nonviolent struggle and the I have a dream speech. They didn't talk about how MLK was jaded by capitalism and how it created such a wealth gap that he became a damn near Marxist, that you can't have social justice if wealth is not distributed from the hands of the thieves in the Epstein class back on down to where wealth should have remained with the people. But the system won't tell you any of this. They don't want you challenging them and their propaganda. Second, after reading, challenge. If you hear something that sounds off or strange, challenge it. Speak up, whether in person or on social media. Outside of college and university, this is how I learned and became informed by other people on social media. Third, find your senators and representatives, as I did, and contact them. Force them to address issues such as high cost of living, affordability, the housing crisis, increasing homelessness, the lack of free health care, the weakening social safety net, the lack of livable wage jobs, AI and automation erasing many jobs, including good paying ones, and so on.